Have you ever stepped out of your home or maybe taken a short trip and wondered, do my kids even notice I'm gone? Or perhaps, what are they thinking about while I'm not there? You're not alone in that feeling. There comes a moment in life, especially after 60, when the roles start to shift. The kids who once clung to your every word now have their own lives, responsibilities, and in many cases, their own kids. But just because they're grown doesn't mean they stop thinking about you. Quite the opposite, actually. Now, you may think, well, they never say much. They don't call as often. Maybe they're just busy. And that might be true. Life does get busy. But silence doesn't always mean absence of thought. The truth is, when you're not around, whether it's for a few days or just a quiet week, your children still think about you more than you might imagine. And sometimes what they think might surprise you. You see, absence has a funny way of stirring emotions. It brings up memories. It triggers reflection. And even if your adult children don't always show it, your presence, or lack thereof, still means something. They think about whether you're okay, whether you're happy, whether they've been good sons and daughters to you, and sometimes whether they've done enough to show you that they care. I remember speaking to a friend named Martha, a sweet 67-year-old widow from Ohio. She told me about the time she decided to take a week-long retreat to a quiet cabin in Vermont, just to clear her head. She left a note for her son and daughter, both in their 30s, saying she'd be offline and unreachable for a few days. Nothing dramatic, just a little reset. She expected peace and quiet. What she didn't expect was the flurry of texts and voicemails waiting for her when she returned. "Mom, are you okay? Why didn't you tell me you were going out of town? Is everything all right?" Her daughter even drove by the house just to make sure it was still standing. Now, were they always this responsive when she was around? Not really. They were wrapped up in work, kids, bills, you know how life goes. But in her absence, they noticed the gap. The quiet stirred something inside them. And in that silence, they realized just how much they still leaned on the idea of Mom being there. Quietly, but constantly. And maybe your situation is a little different. Maybe your kids don't say much at all. Maybe they're distant. Maybe there's tension or even a little history. That's okay. It doesn't mean they don't think about you. Often, the most complex thoughts come in silence. Adult children carry more unspoken emotions than they let on. Guilt, love, worry, regret, gratitude, sometimes all in the same breath. When you're not around, some kids wonder if they've been good enough to you lately. They think back to the last conversation they had with you. Was it rushed? Were they kind? Did they say, "I love you," or just hang up mid-sentence while juggling a toddler and a work call? These are the thoughts that catch them off guard in your absence. Others start noticing your influence more when you're not present. They see your habits in their own lives. The way they fold laundry, the way they cook chili on Sundays, the way they speak to their own children. And in those small, quiet moments, they realize, that came from Mom. Or Dad always did it this way. Sometimes your absence brings up worry, a little fear, even panic. Because as strong as you may appear, your kids know, on some level, that time is marching on. And when they don't hear from you, even for a little while, there's a whisper in the back of their mind that asks, what if something happened? They may not say it out loud, but that fear is real, and it's born from love. I once met a man named George, retired Navy, tough as nails. He told me that after his mother passed, he found a voicemail she left 2 years earlier while he was on vacation. He had ignored it at the time, just a simple, "Hope you're having fun, sweetheart." But now, that little message was priceless. He listened to it over and over, not because of what she said, but because it reminded him she was still thinking about him even when he was away. That's the kind of connection you have with your kids. Even if they don't always show it, they feel your presence. And when it's missing, it creates space. Space for reflection, emotion, and sometimes even transformation. Now, I know not every child will respond with open arms or emotional messages when you're gone. Some might act like nothing happened. Others may carry resentment or hurt from the past. But even those kids, yes, even the difficult ones, have a voice inside them that notices your absence. And more often than not, it's asking, am I doing right by my parents? Have I said what I needed to say? Do they know I care? You might be surprised how many grown adults still long for their parents' approval, for their presence, for their simple reassurance. Your presence still anchors them even if they don't admit it. And when you're not around, that anchor feels just a little less steady. So what can you do with this knowledge? Well, for starters, don't underestimate your impact. Your presence still matters, whether you're actively involved in their lives every day or just quietly living in your own rhythm. But also, don't be afraid to create space. Sometimes stepping back gently allows your children the chance to realize how much they still value you. You don't need to chase their attention. Just live your life fully and let your light shine. They'll feel it, even from a distance. And when the opportunity arises, whether it's a short call, a text, or a visit, use it as a moment of connection, not guilt. You don't need to lecture them or demand more of their time. Just show them you're still there, still strong, still loving. That alone is a powerful message, one that lingers, even when you're not in the room. As the days roll by and you go about your routines, maybe walking through the garden, watching your favorite show, or enjoying a quiet meal, it might feel like you're just a small dot in your children's busy lives. But don't be so sure. While it may seem like they're lost in their own worlds, juggling work deadlines, soccer practices, bills, and bedtime stories, your quiet presence, or even your quiet absence, still echoes in the background of their lives more than they'd ever admit. Sometimes it's subtle. A child sits at the kitchen table, staring at their coffee, and suddenly remembers how you used to brew the perfect cup and sneak in a little cream when no one was looking. Other times it's sharp. They might catch themselves scolding their own child and hear your voice coming out of their mouth. And just like that, they're reminded you're still a part of them. Deeply so. But here's where it gets complicated. When you're not there, your kids don't just miss you. They start thinking. Not just about what you're doing, but about themselves, their choices, their relationship with you. Some wrestle with guilt. Others wrestle with pride. And many wrestle with both. Your absence makes space for all those emotions to come flooding in, uninvited. Some of your kids might start thinking, I should really call Dad more often. Or, when was the last time I actually sat down and asked Mom how she's doing? They may not act on it immediately. Sometimes they'll even push the thought away, thinking, I'll call her tomorrow. And then tomorrow becomes next week. But that seed is planted. And every quiet moment, every empty seat at the dinner table, every little reminder, waters that seed just a bit more. And for some, your absence becomes a mirror, a quiet reflection of how they've been showing up or not showing up in the relationship. They think about your sacrifices, your patience, your steady love. They think about the nights you stayed up late when they were sick, or how you cheered from the sidelines even when you were bone tired. And now, in your quiet absence, they ask themselves, have I done enough to return that kind of love? It's not always comfortable for them. It's easier to stay busy than to sit with those thoughts. But they're there just under the surface. Even your most independent child, the one who rarely checks in or seems emotionally distant, feels that tug. They just have their own way of processing it. For some, it takes longer. For others, it shows up when they least expect it, like during a sermon, a movie scene, or a sudden health scare. And let's talk about that for a moment. Health. When you're not feeling well, or when your absence is due to illness, your children's thoughts shift dramatically. Worry creeps in. Not the kind they post on Facebook or talk about openly at dinner parties, but the quiet, restless kind that keeps them up at night. They begin to reflect on what really matters, how fragile life can be, and how little time we all have. I once spoke to a woman named Joanne, whose mother had gone into the hospital for a minor procedure. Nothing major, just a routine thing. But those 2 nights her mother wasn't home, Joanne said they were the most reflective 2 nights she'd had in years. She realized how much her mom still anchored the family, even from a distance, and how much she'd been taking that steady love for granted. Her mom came home just fine, but something shifted. From that point on, she started calling every Sunday, no matter what. Sometimes absence doesn't just make the heart grow fonder, it makes the heart wiser. But it's not always about heavy thoughts and emotions. Sometimes your kids think about you with joy, with laughter. They tell stories about you at gatherings. They impersonate your quirks, imitate your sayings, recreate your recipes. And those moments, though small, are filled with love. Your absence in those moments isn't a hole. It's a thread that pulls everyone closer together, wrapped around shared memories and stories. You've probably heard someone say, "Parents never really leave, even when they're gone." That's true in more ways than one. Your presence, your values, your sense of humor, your resilience, it lives on in your children. But it lives even louder when you're not physically around. That's when they start noticing. That's when they feel it. And for some adult children, your absence also sparks a desire to do better, to reconnect, to apologize, to make peace with the past. Maybe they said something hurtful years ago and never brought it up again. Maybe they drifted away during a rough patch. Your quiet absence gives them the emotional space to revisit those moments. Not with anger, but with a new lens. One that's more mature, more understanding, more open to healing. Not every child acts on those thoughts. Some need more time. Others need a little nudge. But just knowing that these thoughts are stirring in their hearts can give you a sense of peace. You haven't been forgotten. You haven't been pushed aside. You're there, in the fabric of who they are, and in the quiet corners of their mind when you're not in sight. So, what do you do with that knowledge? You don't chase. You don't guilt trip. And you certainly don't retreat into bitterness. What you do is stay steady. You live your life with love, with purpose, with presence, even in your absence. You continue to plant seeds through small gestures, kind words, unexpected notes, or even the warmth in your voice during a 5-minute phone call. Because every seed you plant might one day become a bridge back to deeper connection. And you also give them grace. Grace to be busy. Grace to be flawed. Grace to not always say the right thing at the right time. Because sometimes your patience teaches them more about love than any lecture ever could. As you age, you're not becoming less important. You're becoming more valuable in a different way. You become a touchstone, a reminder, a symbol of where they came from. When you're not there, they feel that. And with time, they learn to appreciate it more. Your legacy is not measured only by who you were in their childhood, but by who you are now. In the quiet presence you bring, in the wisdom you carry, in the love you give freely, even when no one's looking. And when you're not around, your kids, whether they say it or not, feel that space. They think of you, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with longing, sometimes with joy, and sometimes with a tear or a chuckle. But always, always with something real. There's something powerful about knowing that even in silence, you're still being thought about. But what matters just as much as what your kids think when you're absent is what they feel. And here's the truth: most grown children won't say out loud. They feel your absence far more than they're comfortable admitting. Sometimes that absence brings a strange sense of relief, not because they want to be away from you, but because they've been feeling guilty. Guilt for not calling, not visiting, not doing enough. And when you're gone, whether for a few hours, a few days, or more, it brings that guilt to the surface. But underneath that guilt is love. Deep, sometimes messy, always complicated love. Your kids feel it when they walk past your old chair and realize it's empty. They feel it when they hear a song you used to hum while cooking. They feel it when they go through a tough moment and catch themselves thinking, "I wish I could talk to Mom right now." Or Dad would know what to say. There's this unspoken connection that lives between parents and their children, even well into adulthood. And often it's during your absence that those emotional threads tug the hardest. But here's another feeling that can sneak up on your kids when you're not around: regret. Maybe they argued with you about something silly. Maybe they brushed you off when you called last week. Maybe they've been too caught up in their own lives to ask you about yours. In your absence, those little moments come back to them like echoes. And they realize, "I could have done better." And this is where your quiet strength becomes so important. You may not always hear an apology. You may not always get the "thank you" or "I'm sorry" you deserve. But if you can find peace in knowing that your absence is creating space for those reflections, you've already done something remarkable. You've shown your children that love doesn't demand attention. It simply endures. Some seniors ask, "Should I bring it up? Should I confront my kids about how they act when I'm not around?" And to that I say, maybe. But not with anger, not with shame. The most powerful way to communicate your worth is to live it. Show them you're thriving. Let them see that you still take walks, still read your books, still laugh with friends, still cook your favorite meals. Let your absence speak not through guilt, but through grace. That's how you shift the narrative, not by forcing them to think of you, but by making them proud when they do. It's not about proving that you're still needed in their lives. It's about reminding them that you're still living yours. And here's the beautiful twist. Sometimes your absence inspires them to step up, not just emotionally, but practically. They start to ask, "Am I doing enough for my mom? Does Dad need anything? Should I visit more often?" Your quiet distance can be the gentle nudge that moves them from thought to action. It might not happen right away. It might come in the form of a random text or a surprise knock at your door one Sunday afternoon. It might be subtle, a check-in, an offer to help with groceries, a long overdue, "Hey, I've been thinking about you." And when it happens, don't focus on the delay. Focus on the moment. Because every step your kids take toward connection is one you helped plant through your presence and your absence. Even those who don't know how to express emotion in words, maybe they were raised to keep their feelings inside, will often find other ways. They fix something in your house without being asked. They bring your favorite pie on Thanksgiving. They suddenly show more interest in how you're doing, even if they mask it in practical questions like, "Do you need new batteries for the smoke detector?" That's love too. It doesn't always arrive with hugs and poems. Sometimes it comes with a wrench, a bag of groceries, or a random phone call that starts with "just checking in." And you know what? That's enough. Because love in action is louder than love in words. Now, let's talk about a different kind of absence. The emotional kind. The kind that comes not because you went on vacation or didn't call for a few days, but because they pulled away. Maybe your child has distanced themselves, cut back on communication, or stopped showing up entirely. That kind of absence can hurt. It stings in ways that are hard to explain. But even in that space, your child is still thinking about you, even if pride, pain, or life has gotten in the way. And your steady, loving presence, even from afar, still matters. Sometimes, just knowing you're still there, still willing to love without conditions, is what eventually brings them back. You're not powerless in those moments. You're patient. You're wise. You've lived long enough to know that time has a way of softening edges. Let your consistency be the invitation they didn't know they needed. And if they never come around, you can still live your life with joy and purpose. Because your worth is not defined by how often they call, how much they visit, or whether they say the right things. Your worth is already set by your kindness, your strength, your memories, your heart. You are a living legacy. And that legacy ripples out whether you're sitting next to them or miles away. Remember, you don't need to force a connection. You don't need to chase love or demand attention. When your presence is grounded in love and peace, your absence will carry meaning. Because you've already written yourself into the story of their lives. Not just as a parent, but as a teacher, a cheerleader, a safe place, a home. They may not always say it. They may not always show it. But they feel it. Every time they hear your laugh in their own, every time they say a phrase you always said, every time they look in the mirror and see a part of you looking back. You've made it this far with me, and I hope by now you're starting to see the bigger picture. Your presence in your children's lives is powerful, but so is your absence. Not because you're missing, but because even in the quiet moments, when you're not physically there, your role in their hearts doesn't disappear. If anything, it becomes louder, clearer, and more meaningful. Let's talk about something important as we close this conversation. Peace. There comes a time in life when the most powerful thing you can offer, to yourself and to your children, is peace. The peace of knowing that you've loved well, that you've done your best, that your kids carry your lessons, your values, and yes, your voice with them, even when they're far away. You might not get the thank yous. You might not get the apologies. You might not hear, "I miss you," nearly as often as you'd like. But if you can find peace in the knowledge that you still matter, even when you're not in the room, that's a beautiful kind of freedom. There's something freeing about realizing you don't have to do more to be loved. You don't have to remind your kids to think of you. You don't have to compete with their schedules or demand their attention. What you've already given, your time, your support, your sacrifices, is still alive in them. And when they're ready, when the noise of their lives settles for even a moment, they'll feel it. You see, love doesn't always look like a bouquet of flowers or a Sunday dinner. Sometimes it looks like a quick call on a Tuesday night that ends in, "Okay, I'll talk to you soon." It looks like them forwarding you a funny article you might like. It looks like their voice softening when they say your name. Love wears many faces, and it doesn't always say, "I love you," but you'll know it when it shows up. Now maybe you're watching this and feeling a little heartache. Maybe your kids have been distant, or there's tension you wish you could erase. And if that's the case, I want you to hear this. You are still worthy of love, of connection, and of peace. Relationships can be complicated, but that doesn't mean they're hopeless. Sometimes all it takes is one open door, one honest moment, for things to begin to heal. But whether that healing comes tomorrow, next year, or never in the way you hoped, your life still holds joy. Your purpose is not only in being someone's parent, it's in being you. The person who still wakes up each day with something to give, someone to smile at, something to enjoy. Your presence brings warmth into the world, and your absence leaves a mark not of emptiness, but of value. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are the reason someone knows how to be strong, how to keep going, how to love better, even if they don't say it outright. even if they don't always act like it. And maybe you're also thinking, what can I do to make our connection stronger? Sometimes it's as simple as giving your children the freedom to show up in their own way. Let go of expectations and open your heart to small gestures. A visit, a phone call, a text. Celebrate what is, rather than mourn what's not. Because small moments, over time, build deep roots. Also, don't be afraid to tell them how you feel. Not with blame, not with sadness, but with honesty and grace. A message like, "I love hearing from you, even when it's short." Or, "I always enjoy the time we spend together," goes a long way. You're not being needy, you're being real. And real is what they'll remember. They're listening more than you think, watching more than they say, and learning from your example every day. If you model calm, steady love, even when things aren't perfect, they'll carry that lesson long after you're gone. Because in the end, that's what we leave behind. Not just memories, but a blueprint. A map for how to be kind, how to forgive, how to keep showing up, how to love, even when love gets quiet. So today, I want you to hold your head high. Not because your life has been perfect, but because your presence, then and now, still matters. And your absence doesn't erase you. It reveals how much you've been part of the foundation all along. Your kids may not always say the right thing. They may not always come around in the ways you hoped. But that doesn't mean you haven't shaped them. You have. And every time they think of you, whether with laughter, tears, or quiet appreciation, you continue to live in their lives in a powerful way. Let that truth comfort you. Let it strengthen you. And let it remind you that love doesn't fade just because the house gets quiet. Sometimes, that's when love speaks the loudest. Before we go, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. If this message touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if you found this video helpful, please like it and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. We're here to share not just information, but encouragement, wisdom, and support for your journey after 60. You deserve to be seen, to be valued, and to be loved deeply, even in silence, even in absence, and especially in this beautiful chapter of life. Here's to living fully, loving bravely, and knowing without a doubt that you matter. Always.